Elsewhere, Historical Society, Dave Weinstein, thanks for coming. Several people are going to be at this event today who actually remember what things were like back in the old days. This is Clyde Bygone. His father owned the famous Six Bells Club. We'll be hearing a lot about it today. This is where Burger King now stands. It was the most fabulous club in town.
On that fateful night in 1947, I was the undercover officer in the Coleman Club.
My grandfather owned Rosenstraw Meat and sold meat to the dog racing track.
Rosenstraw Meat. They sold meat to the dog racing track. You can bet those dogs ate a lot of meat.
One of the Bygone brothers found a skull in Cerrito Creek back, I think it was in the 1930s or mid-40s.
A raccoon skull?
No, a
deer skull?
Human skull.
An old one?
Yes.
Like an Indian skull?
Possibly.
What happened?
There was never any follow-up article on it.
Where do you suppose that skull ended up?
That's a good question. I know when they were excavating around here back early in the century, they found the whole Indian area where El Cerrito Plaza.
Area. There were like nightclubs all over town. The entire San Pablo Avenue. But what I get from Tom Paz is this area, right around County Line, Alameda, Contra Costa, was the main place where it was happening. Okay? Where we were standing was not part of El Cerrito until 1955. It was called No Man's Land. So even when El Cerrito cleaned up their part, which they didn't do any too quickly, they didn't clean this part up until 1955. This is the old wagon wheel. It was owned by a consortium of criminals, mostly William Big Bill Peachard. He was like the main guy behind it. There was a guy named Dave Kessel. Dave Kessel's nephew is right here. Dave Kessel lived in a tremendous mansion on St. James Place in Piedmont. It had Goldman pitchers that drank red wine out of their bowls. In this building, this very building, they plotted to take over gambling throughout Northern California. Nobody could gamble unless they paid these guys money. Prostitution was really big in El Cerrito, all over the darn place, including upstairs in the building we were just in. But those were prostitute shacks. There. See those strange looking buildings? They used to have more of a historic look up to a few years ago. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about this area. This area, which I believe is generally called Bayview now, used to be called No Man's Land. Now, No Man's Land, I don't know where that term came from, but during World War I, it was the area between the trenches. And that's why it was probably in a lot of use during this period of time. This area was settled. This is one of the first areas to be settled in the El Cerrito area. Okay? Again, remember, it wasn't part of El Cerrito until about 1955, but in the teens, a guy named Henderson was settling it, and like a lot of areas, no Orientals were allowed. If you look at in this house, there's like an actual barn. If you walk around here, you look over, so it gives you a sense of what this area might have looked like when it was still a little bit rural. We had two of the major gambling halls were right where we're standing. Okay, we're at Yosemite and San Diego. So on that corner, where this structure is, that was the 90 Club. Am I getting that right, Tom? Yes. Okay. And on this one, that was the Acme Club. Dozens and dozens and dozens of places that had drinking and gambling. I'm not sure exactly how many at any one time, really big places with like lights and with all kinds of fancy decor, but there were any number of those too. You could go all the way up and down San Pablo Avenue in the 30s. Light, 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 light. The speed limit was 55, okay? Yes.
That was Highway 40.
It was Highway 40. It was a major highway. It was lit. It was hard to park at 5 in the morning. People said you couldn't find a place to park. February 14th, Valentine's Day, 1935, local police in skill ball raid on the Acme Club, and they called this Richmond at the time. The Rancho and 90 Club, both of them. The Rancho was the old Castro Adobe. That was in what is now El Cerrito Plaza.
That was burned down too.
That burned down in the 50s.
Both burned it. They burned it. I think we see a pattern.
Well, you're jumping ahead. You're jumping ahead. 1939, it was raided. That and the Acme were raided on the same day. District Attorney Healy, again, this was outside of the city limits, so the city wasn't raiding it. They arrested a whole bunch of people, $200 bail. Listen to this. Although the raid on the Rancho was without excitement, the 90 Club raid was replete with thrills, with the deputies chopping their way through 3 doors, okay, to get into the gambling room, while an estimated 15 patrons, men and women and game operators, fled through a laboratory window. Yeah, Pastime Hardware upstairs in Pastime is the former Schwacka Hall. And that used to be a gathering place and dancing, and it still has a lot of the architectural elements, although it's really hard to see because they use it to store stuff, so the place is full of hardware, you know?
Like right behind us here is where the cave was. It was a Chinese club. Said to be the lowest of the low, but like it was a terrific position right at the county line. Because back in those days, I guess they couldn't pursue people across the county line. You know, they bar the door and then shoot out across the creek, and they could never catch anybody. Chris, Mr. Treadway here is telling us they raided it in 1936.
They raided it in 1936, and the crowd inside started chanting, "What about the dog track? What about the dog track?" Because they were feeling that they were being treated differently than all the gambling that was going on across San Pablo.
Where was the dog track?
At El Cerrito Plaza. This was built in 1948. It's the old West Gun Room now. An earlier incarnation, it was known as Sand Pan Antiques, and it was built with rocks and boulders gathered from the foot of Albany Hill.
Across the street from us, in what is now El Cerrito Plaza, that was the most important place in the history of El Cerrito. Victor Castro, he was the land grantee, built an adobe there. It was expanded over the years. Eventually it became a two-story adobe, and there were a number of outbuildings. We'll see a picture of it later, okay? According to something that I read, Victor Castro was kind of a prude, and he didn't gamble. It would have been a laugh on him that his place, his former adobe, became the Rancho San Pablo or the Rancho Club. It was one of the major gambling places in El Cerrito. Southern Pacific had a special ferry from Berkeley, timed to catch the races at that place, okay?
The track gave out vouchers good for a ferry ride and a Greyhound fittingly bus ride to the track.
Picture El Cerrito. Be here and picture what it was like. A dog racing track there. A big dog racing track. The clubs, okay, the Kona Club, destroyed by conflagration, 1938, right there. Early Morning Blaze destroys one of Cerrito's oldest nightclubs.
That was the one across the street.
Oh, that was the one across the street.
Where Mechanics Bank is today.
Okay, so the first one was where Mechanics Bank is. That was destroyed in 1938 from a cigarette dropped into a Chesterfield.
Yeah,
a Chesterfield
sure.
was a sofa. World War II started, and just before they knew that they needed to have a lot of housing, so that became the Fairmont Court, and it was apparently a very well-run trailer court for war workers, many of whom worked in the various shipyards and tank factories in Richmond.
Right, so missing our signs.
99%. I might say there was a hat check, and there were rooms way in the back. The bar, and it wasn't a big gambling when I was there in '47. They had slot machines in the back, and they played a high-low game, which I lost $60 on. This was the front door, the bar was right here, and that game was right there.
It's a work of mid-century modern architecture. It's also called the Fortress. This was the home of Big Bill Peachard. He was the guy who was the major kingpin of gambling, not just in El Cerrito, but really throughout portions of Northern California. So if you ever saw that movie, Little Caesar, remember at the very end, they're going to get Edward G. Robinson, and they hold themselves in this impenetrable fortress that the police can't get? That was the way this building was designed to be.
Still the same building?
Yeah, it still looks very much like it. It was designed like in the 40s. It's a real mid-century thing. Look at it. With that pillar and okay. In 1934, there was an ad, the Pastime Lunch and Billiard Parlor, where good fellows get together for lunch and pleasure. And then in 1935, an ad announced the grand opening, no longer the Pastime Lunch, but Pastime Tavern. 1923, Lee answers charges made against El Cerrito. El Cerrito is not a den of vice, says the mayor. False stories started by factions in the city with the object of making political injury to the present city administration have again been taken up by certain elements in our sister cities. Notice that comic store, that one there, vacuum, they still have that early 1920 brickwork. Kind of interesting. Notice the Cerrito Theater, which opened in 1937, restored 10 years ago. Okay? Next to the Cerrito Theater was a place that was called Little Madison Square Garden. Okay? That's where they had prize fights.
Enormous numbers and bookie operations that ran out of Rancho San Pablo and out of Dietrich's place down the wagon wheel. People would say there was 50, 100 phone lines going in. There were
300.
enormous bookie operations. And
There were 300 phone lines in Dietrich, Citadel, where they could feed results over to the wagon wheel.
It wasn't just local at all. El Cerrito was really a central hub of gambling. It was gambling all up and down San Pablo Avenue to Pinole, but no place with the reach of El Cerrito.
Cerrito Place, I think, was owned by
Billy Martin, Cerro Square.
Cerro Square, thank you. Cerro Square.